The day I caught Sophia with Matteo was the day everything changed. I remember the weather clearly, one of those unusually warm spring afternoons where the air is heavy with the promise of summer. I'd left work early, hoping to surprise Sophia with a rare evening off. The plan was to cook her favorite dinner, open a bottle of wine, and spend some time together, something we hadn't done in a while. We'd both been busy, caught up in the rush of our lives in the city, and I thought maybe we just needed to reconnect. But life has a way of ripping your heart out when you least expect it. I parked my car a few blocks away, deciding to walk the rest of the way home. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you and makes the world feel smaller. As I approached our apartment building, I felt an odd sense of unease, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. I brushed it off, blaming it on a long day at work. When I stepped into our apartment, the first thing that hit me was the silence. Not the usual silence of an empty home, but something heavier, more charged. I called out her name. Sophia? No answer. The living room was empty, the kitchen untouched since the morning. I set the grocery bags on the counter and walked down the hallway towards our bedroom, feeling that unease growing with every step. The door was ajar, and I could hear voices, low, muffled, intimate. My heart pounded in my chest, and I paused just outside, not wanting to believe what my instincts were telling me. But there it was, Sophia in our bed with Matteo. The shock of it hit me like a freight train, knocking the breath out of my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, frozen, as the world I knew crumbled around me. Finally, I pushed the door open. Sophia, what the hell is this? My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. I didn't even recognize the sound of it, strangled, broken. Sophia scrambled to cover herself, her face a mixture of shock and guilt. Matteo, my so-called friend, had the decency to look ashamed, but it did nothing to quell the rage boiling up inside me. Leo, it's not what it looks like, Sophia started, her voice trembling, but I cut her off. Don't insult me with lies, Sophia, I snapped, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I think it's pretty damn clear what's going on. Matteo got up, trying to gather his clothes with shaking hands. Leonardo, man, I. Shut up, Matteo, I interrupted, my voice cold. You don't get to say anything. Just get out, both of you. Sophia reached out to me, desperation in her eyes. Please, Leo, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I said, my voice flat now hollow. You made your choice, Sophia. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind me. I didn't look back as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, ignoring the sound of Sophia's voice calling after me. I couldn't stay there, couldn't breathe the same air as them. I needed to get out, to escape the suffocating pain that was closing in on me. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just needing to put as much distance between me and that apartment as possible. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How could she do this to me? How could Matteo, someone I trusted, betray me like this? I ended up at a small bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I sat at the counter, nursing a drink, trying to numb the pain. But the alcohol did nothing to dull the sharp edges of my thoughts. All I could see was Sophia and Matteo, and the life I thought I had slipping through my fingers. At some point, I realized that I couldn't go back. Not to that apartment, not to that life. It was over, and I needed to accept it. But more than that, I needed to change. I couldn't keep living this life, pretending everything was fine while I was slowly dying inside. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my boss's number. It was late, but I didn't care. I needed to do this now, before I lost my nerve. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Leonardo, what's going on? It's late. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you about something important, I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. I'm quitting. There was a pause on the other end, and then his voice came back, laced with confusion. Quitting? Leo, what are you talking about? You're one of our best people. I can't do it anymore, I said, the words pouring out before I could second-guess myself. I need to get out of this city, out of this life. I'm leaving. Is this about Sophia? He asked, his tone softening. Look, Leo, don't make any hasty decisions. Take some time to think about it. I thought about it, I replied firmly. I've been thinking about it for a long time. This isn't just about Sophia. It's about everything. I need to go. He sighed heavily on the other end. All right, if that's what you really want, I won't try to stop you. But know that you'll always have a place here if you change your mind. Thanks, I said, meaning it. But I won't. I need a fresh start. After I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. The decision was made, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I had control over something in my life. That night, I didn't go back to the apartment. Instead, I checked into a motel on the edge of town and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I was going to do next. I needed to leave, to find a place where I could start over, where the memories of Sophia and Matteo couldn't reach me. And that's when I thought of my grandfather's village. I hadn't been there in years, not since his funeral, but I remembered the peace I had felt there, the simplicity of life that seemed so far removed from the chaos of the city. It was the perfect place to disappear, to rebuild myself from the ground up. By morning, my mind was made up. I packed what little I had brought with me to the motel and set off for the village, leaving behind everything I had known. The city, my job, Sophia, all of it was in the past now. As I drove out of the city, the weight on my chest began to lift, replaced by a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I had no idea what awaited me in the village, no clear plan for what I would do when I got there. All I knew was that I needed a fresh start, a new beginning, and I was ready to face whatever came next, alone but determined to find a new purpose in life. As the miles rolled by and the city skyline disappeared in my rearview mirror, I took a deep breath and let go of the past. My life had taken a sudden turn, but I was ready to embrace the change. This was my turning point, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The village looked exactly as I remembered it, a place where time seemed to slow down, allowing you to catch your breath and take in the simple beauty of life. As I drove through the narrow, winding roads, passing by fields of green and clusters of cottages, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and hope. This was where I had spent so many summers as a child, helping my grandfather with his small farm, learning about the land, and understanding the value of hard work. It was a place that had always felt like home, even though I hadn't been here in years. When I finally arrived at my grandfather's house, I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. The old stone cottage, with its weathered walls and ivy-covered roof, stood as a testament to a life well lived. The garden was overgrown, and the paint on the windows was peeling, but it was still standing, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. I parked the car and got out, taking in the familiar sights and smells. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of earth and flowers, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of the village. This was it, the fresh start I needed. As I walked up to the front door, I couldn't help but think about my grandfather. He had been a kind, gentle man, someone who had taught me everything I knew about farming and life. I could almost hear his voice in the wind, telling me that I was making the right choice. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The inside of the house was dusty and filled with memories. The furniture was old but sturdy, the kind that had been built to last. I wandered through the rooms, each one bringing back a flood of memories, summers spent here, working the land, learning about the world from a man who had seen it change so much over his lifetime. As I stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at the fields beyond, I knew what I wanted to do. I was going to bring this place back to life. I was going to build a farm just like my grandfather had, but bigger, better. It would be my way of honoring him, of finding a new purpose in life. The next morning, I set to work. The first thing I did was clean the house from top to bottom. It was hard work, but it felt good to sweat, to see the immediate results of my efforts. I cleared out the cobwebs, scrubbed the floors, and aired out the rooms. By the end of the day, the cottage felt more like a home, a place where I could imagine myself living. As I was finishing up, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a tall, broad-shouldered man with a warm smile and a worn hat perched on his head. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he extended his hand. "You must be Leonardo," he said, his voice deep and friendly. "I'm Christian, your neighbor. I heard someone was back in the old cottage, and I figured I'd come by and introduce myself." I shook his hand, grateful for the friendly gesture. Nice to meet you, Christian. Yeah, I'm Leonardo. Just moved in, trying to get the place back in shape. Christian nodded, looking over my shoulder into the house. Looks like you've already done a good bit of work. Your grandfather would be proud. He was a good man, your granddad. Taught me a thing or two about farming when I first moved here. Thank you, I replied, feeling a pang of emotion at the mention of my grandfather. He was a great teacher. I learned a lot from him. Christian grinned, leaning against the doorframe. So, what's the plan, Leonardo? You thinking of settling down here for good? I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I think I am. I want to rebuild the farm, maybe even expand it. It's going to take some time, but I'm committed. Christian's eyes lit up with approval. That's good to hear. We could use some fresh blood in the village, someone with new ideas and the will to work hard. If you need any help, don't hesitate to ask. Farming's not an easy life, but it's a good one. And folks around here, they look out for each other. I smiled, appreciating his offer. Thanks, Christian. I might just take you up on that. There's a lot to do, and I'm going to need all the help I can get. Christian nodded, tipping his hat. You're welcome anytime. And if you need any supplies or advice, just let me know. I've got a small farm of my own, not too far from here. Maybe once you're settled, we can trade tips or lend each other a hand. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. It's good to know I've got a neighbor I can count on. We chatted a bit longer, and by the time Christian left, I felt like I had made my first real connection in the village. It was a small step, but it was important. If I was going to make this work, I needed to become a part of this community, just like my grandfather had been. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the work. I started by clearing the overgrown fields, working from dawn until dusk. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was also liberating. There was something deeply satisfying about working the land, seeing the progress I was making each day. It wasn't just about rebuilding the farm, it was about rebuilding myself, piece by piece. One afternoon, as I was taking a break, Christian stopped by again, this time with a couple of sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Figured you could use a break, he said, handing me one of the sandwiches. You've been working like a madman out here. I laughed, grateful for the company. Yeah, it's been non-stop. But it feels good, you know? Like I'm finally doing something that matters. Christian nodded, taking a seat on a nearby tree stump. I get it. There's something about working the land that gets into your blood. It's honest work, and at the end of the day, you can see what you've accomplished. Not many jobs give you that. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, eating our sandwiches and watching the sun dip lower in the sky. You've got big plans, huh? Christian asked, breaking the silence. I do, I admitted. I want to start with a small farm, but eventually I'd like to expand. Maybe add a dairy operation, some meat processing. I want to create something sustainable, something that can grow. Christian gave a low whistle. That's ambitious. But if anyone can do it, it's you. You've got the drive, that's for sure. And with the right help, there's no reason you can't make it happen. I looked at him, feeling a surge of determination. I'm willing to put in the work. I just hope it's enough. Christian clapped me on the shoulder. It will be. You've already taken the hardest step, starting. The rest is just one foot in front of the other. His words stayed with me as I continued working, pushing through the long days and the inevitable setbacks. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, when the scope of what I was trying to do seemed too big, too daunting. But I kept going, driven by the vision I had in my mind, the farm, thriving and alive, a place where I could find peace and purpose. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, I stood at the edge of the field, looking out at the land I had cleared. It was still rough, still a work in progress, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I was meant to do. This was where I was meant to be. And with the support of people like Christian, I knew that I could build something lasting, something that would make my grandfather proud. The dream was starting to take shape, and with each passing day, it felt more real, more achievable. The farm was more than just a project, it was my future, and I was ready to fight for it. The village had a rhythm of its own, a steady, unhurried pace that felt like the opposite of everything I had known in the city. Here, life was slower, more deliberate, and people took the time to know one another. It was a place where everyone had a story, and as I settled into my new routine, I began to learn those stories one by one. But there was one person whose story intrigued me more than anyone else's: Valentina. I first saw her at the local market, which was held every Saturday in the village square. It was a bustling place, filled with vendors selling fresh produce, handmade crafts, and other goods. I had been coming here regularly to stock up on supplies for the farm, and I was starting to recognize some familiar faces among the crowd. But Valentina was different. She stood behind a small stall, her hands deftly arranging jars of homemade jams and preserves on the wooden table in front of her. She had a quiet, almost ethereal presence, with long dark hair that framed her delicate features. Her eyes were a deep, warm brown, and there was a certain sadness in them that drew me in. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it was like a brief glimpse of sunlight on a cloudy day. I found myself lingering near her stall longer than necessary, pretending to browse the jars of jam even though I had no intention of buying any. She noticed, of course, and after a few minutes, she looked up at me with a curious expression. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I'd fumbled for a response, caught off guard by her directness. I was just looking at your jams. They seem well made." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed with my attempt at small talk. "They are. Made from fruit I grow myself, without any additives. Just pure, natural ingredients." I nodded, feeling foolish. That's impressive. I've been trying to get my farm up and running, so I know how much work goes into something like that. Her expression softened slightly, and she glanced down at the jars in front of her. "It is a lot of work, but it's worth it. There's something satisfying about creating something with your own hands, something that people can enjoy." I could see the truth in her words. There was a pride there, a sense of accomplishment that I understood all too well. I decided to buy a jar of strawberry jam, more as a way to continue the conversation than anything else. "I'll take one of these," I said, reaching for my wallet. "My name's Leonardo, by the way." I moved into the old cottage at the edge of the village. She handed me the jar, her eyes meeting mine briefly. "I know. Word gets around in a place like this. I'm Valentina." "Nice to meet you, Valentina," I said, offering her a smile. "Maybe you can give me some tips on how to grow fruit as good as yours. I'm still learning the ropes." A flicker of something, was it amusement, passed over her face. "It takes time, patience. You'll figure it out." I wanted to ask her more, to learn about her life, her story, but she seemed guarded, not the type to open up easily. So I paid for the jam and thanked her, hoping that this wouldn't be our last conversation. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting Valentina's stall at the market more often, each time buying something small. Another jar of jam, a bottle of honey, a loaf of bread she had baked herself. Our conversations were brief, but I started to notice little things about her. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her garden, the way her hands moved gracefully as she arranged her products, the hint of a smile that sometimes appeared when I made a joke. One Saturday, as I approached her stall, I noticed she was struggling with a large crate of jars. Without thinking, I stepped forward to help. "Here, let me give you a hand," I offered, reaching for the crate. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you. It's heavier than I expected." I lifted the crate easily and set it down on the table. No problem. I'm used to heavy lifting these days. Valentina gave me a small, grateful smile, and for a moment, the sadness in her eyes seemed to lift. "You're very kind, Leonardo." I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just trying to be neighborly. We have to look out for each other, right?" She nodded, but her expression grew more serious. "That's true. In a place like this, people depend on each other." There was a pause, a moment of silence that felt charged with unspoken words. I could tell there was something weighing on her, something she wasn't saying. I wanted to ask, to understand what it was that made her so reserved, but I didn't want to push her away. Instead, I decided to share a bit of my own story, hoping it might encourage her to do the same. "I came here to start over," I said quietly. "My life in the city, it fell apart. I needed a fresh start, and this place felt like the right place to find it." Valentina looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if she was trying to see if I was being sincere. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice soft and tinged with something I couldn't quite place. This village has a way of healing people. It's not always easy, but it helps you find what you're looking for, even if you don't know what that is yet. Her words hung in the air between us, and I felt a connection forming, something deeper than just a passing acquaintance. It was as if she understood exactly what I was going through, even if she didn't know all the details. I wanted to know more about her, to understand the sadness I saw in her eyes, but I knew I had to be patient. As the weeks went by, our interactions became more frequent. I would see Valentina not just at the market, but around the village, at the local bakery, walking along the narrow paths that wound through the fields, tending to her garden. Each time, we exchanged a few words, and slowly she began to open up to me. One afternoon, after the market had closed, I offered to walk her home. She hesitated at first, but then she nodded and we set off together. Her house was a small, charming cottage on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by a garden that was bursting with flowers and fruit trees. It was clear that this place was her sanctuary, a place where she felt safe. As we walked, I decided to ask her the question that had been on my mind since the day we met. "Valentina, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what brought you here? To this village, I mean." She was silent for a long moment, and I wondered if I had overstepped. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as if she was carrying a heavy burden. "It's not an easy story to tell," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came here to escape, to find peace after losing everything." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," I said gently. "I understand what it's like to carry things that are too painful to talk about." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, pain, sorrow, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Maybe one day," she murmured. "But not yet." I nodded, respecting her need for privacy. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." For the first time since we met, she gave me a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Leonardo. You're different from the others. Most people, they don't ask. They don't want to know." "I do," I said simply. "I want to know you, Valentina. I think we're both here for a reason, and maybe we can help each other find what we're looking for." She didn't respond right away, but as we continued walking, I felt the distance between us start to close. It was a small step, but it was important. Valentina was a woman with a past, just like me, and I could see that she was beginning to trust me to let me in. When we reached her cottage, she paused at the gate and turned to me. "Would you like to come in for some tea?" I was surprised by the invitation, but nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, her home was cozy and filled with warmth, just like her garden. The walls were lined with shelves of books, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut flowers. She led me to the kitchen, where she brewed a pot of herbal tea, the kind that soothed the soul. As we sat at the small table, sipping our tea in comfortable silence, I realized that this was the beginning of something new, something that could change both of our lives. Valentina was more than just a neighbor. She was someone I wanted to know, to care for, to protect. And I could see that she was starting to feel the same way about me. We didn't need to say much. The connection between us was growing stronger with each passing day. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. As I left her cottage that evening, the sun setting behind the hills, I couldn't help but smile. Valentina was a mystery, but she was also a light in the darkness, guiding me towards something better. And I was determined to follow that light, no matter where it took me. The farm was slowly starting to take shape. The fields were no longer overgrown. Rows of crops were beginning to sprout, and the animals I had acquired were settling into their new home. Every morning, I woke up before dawn to tend to the land, the animals, and the numerous tasks that seemed to multiply with each passing day. It was exhausting work, but it was fulfilling in a way that my old life had never been. Despite my progress, there were still challenges that seemed to crop up at every turn. The summer brought with it a relentless heat that threatened to dry up my crops, and one of my cows fell ill, leaving me scrambling to find a vet who could help. It felt like I was constantly putting out fires, each one threatening to undo everything I had worked so hard to build. One particularly hot afternoon, I found myself standing in the middle of the field, staring at the wilting plants, frustration gnawing at my insides. The irrigation system I had rigged up wasn't enough to keep everything alive, and I knew I needed a better solution, but I wasn't sure where to start. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard the sound of a truck rumbling down the dirt road. I looked up to see Christian's old pickup approaching. He parked at the edge of the field and climbed out, waving as he walked over to me. "Looks like you could use a hand," Christian said, his eyes scanning the struggling crops. I sighed, wiping the sweat from my brow. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong, Christian. I've been watering as much as I can, but it's not enough. If this keeps up, I'm going to lose everything." Christian nodded thoughtfully, crouching down to inspect the plants. "You're dealing with a tough summer, no doubt about that. But it's not just about water. It's about timing too. You need to get the right balance, and maybe think about mulching to keep the soil moist." "I've tried mulching," I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. "But it's like the land is fighting me at every turn. I feel like I'm just barely keeping my head above water." Christian stood up, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing fine, Leonardo. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a farm. You're going to have setbacks, that's part of the deal. But you've got the right spirit, you just need to keep pushing through." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "I appreciate that, Christian, but sometimes I wonder if I'm in over my head. This isn't just a hobby for me, it's everything I have now." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get it, but you're not alone in this. If you need help, just say the word. You've got a community here that's willing to support you." His words were comforting, and I realized that I had been trying to shoulder too much on my own. I had been so focused on proving to myself that I could do this that I had forgotten the value of leaning on others. "Thanks, Christian," I said, meaning it. "I could use some help actually. Maybe you could show me how you manage your irrigation system. I think I need to upgrade mine." Christian smiled, nodding. "Of course. I'll swing by tomorrow morning, and we can get to work. In the meantime, let's get these plants some water before the sun sets." We spent the rest of the afternoon working together, hauling buckets of water and setting up temporary shade structures to protect the more delicate plants. It was hard labor, but having Christian there made it feel less overwhelming. By the time we were done, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields. As we finished up, I noticed Valentina approaching from the path that led from her cottage to my farm. She was carrying a basket, and as she got closer, I could see it was filled with fresh vegetables and a loaf of bread. "I thought you might be hungry," she said with a smile, holding out the basket. "It looks like you've had a long day." I took the basket, my heart warming at the gesture. "Thank you, Valentina. This is just what I needed." Christian chuckled, giving me a knowing look. "I'll leave you two to it then. I'll be back in the morning, Leonardo. We'll get that irrigation system sorted out." "Thanks, Christian," I said as he waved and headed back to his truck. Valentina watched him go before turning her attention back to me. "Christian's a good man. He's been in this village longer than most." "He is," I agreed. "I don't know what I'd do without his help. And yours, for that matter." Valentina smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You're doing something special here, Leonardo. I can see how much it means to you." "It does," I admitted, setting the basket down and turning to face her. "But sometimes it feels like everything is against me. I'm just trying to keep things from falling apart." She took a step closer, her expression serious. "You're stronger than you think, and you don't have to do this alone. You have people here who care about you, who want to see you succeed." Her words touched something deep inside me, and for a moment I felt a wave of emotion that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. It wasn't just about the farm, it was about finding a place where I belonged, a community that cared about me, a future that I could build with my own hands. "Thank you, Valentina," I said quietly. "I don't think I could do this without you." She reached out and touched my arm, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "You don't have to." We stood there in the twilight, the world around us quiet and still. It was a moment of connection, one that felt like the beginning of something deeper, something that could weather any storm. The next morning, Christian arrived bright and early, true to his word. We spent the day working on the irrigation system, installing new pipes and setting up a more efficient watering schedule. It was hard work, but by the time we were finished, I could already see the difference it made. The plants perked up and the soil retained moisture much better. "You see," Christian said with a grin as we finished the last section. It's all about working smarter, not just harder. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of hope. Thanks, Christian, this is going to make a huge difference. He wiped the sweat from his brow and gave me a satisfied nod. Happy to help. You're doing good work here, Leonardo. Don't let the setbacks get you down. They're just part of the journey. Over the next few weeks, things started to turn around. The crops began to flourish and the animals were healthy and thriving. The farm was starting to resemble the vision I had in my mind, and it felt like I was finally making real progress. One evening, as I was finishing up for the day, Valentina came by again, this time with a plate of freshly baked cookies. We sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. "You've made a lot of progress," she said, handing me a cookie. "The farm looks amazing." I took a bite, savoring the sweet taste. "I couldn't have done it without you and Christian. I feel like I'm finally getting the hang of this." Valentina looked at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "You are. And you're creating something beautiful here, something that will last." I met her gaze, feeling a connection that was growing stronger with each passing day. "I want to share it with you, Valentina. This farm, this life. I want you to be a part of it." She looked away for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Leonardo, I care about you and I love spending time with you. But there's something you need to know, something about my past." I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You can tell me anything, Valentina. I'm here for you." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine once again. "I've been through a lot, Leonardo. I lost someone very close to me, and it took me a long time to heal. I came to this village to start over, just like you. But I'm scared. Scared of getting close to someone again, scared of losing them." Her words hit me hard, and I felt a deep sense of empathy for her. I understood that fear all too well, the fear of opening your heart, only to have it broken. But I also knew that we couldn't let that fear control our lives. "I'm scared too," I admitted. "But I think we're stronger together, Valentina. We've both been hurt, but we've also both found something worth holding on to here. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't want to lose you either, Leonardo. But I need time. Time to make sure I'm ready for this." I nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here waiting." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of our conversation settling between us. But it wasn't a heavy silence, it was filled with promise, with the possibility of something beautiful growing between us. As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The trials I had faced on the farm were nothing compared to the challenges of opening my heart again, of letting someone in. But I knew that it was worth it, that Valentina was worth it. And as I sat there with her, our hands still clasped together, I realized that the triumphs in life weren't just about what we built with our hands. They were about the connections we made, the love we found, and the strength we discovered within ourselves. No matter what trials lay ahead, I knew I could face them as long as I had Valentina by my side. The seasons began to shift, and with them, so did the rhythm of life on the farm. The once intense summer heat had given way to the cooler breezes of autumn, and the fields were now a patchwork of golds, reds, and browns. The harvest was in full swing, and the farm was thriving like never before. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, a feeling that the hard work and trials of the past months had finally paid off. I was up early one morning, the crisp air biting at my skin as I made my way to the barn. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape. The cows were content, the chickens were clucking softly in their coop, and the crops were heavy with produce, ready to be picked. It was the kind of morning that made all the effort worthwhile. As I approached the barn, I saw Valentina standing by the door, her arms wrapped around herself to keep warm. She smiled when she saw me, and I felt that familiar warmth in my chest, the one that always seemed to accompany her presence. "Good morning," she said, her breath visible in the chilly air. "Good morning," I replied, walking over to her. "You're up early." She shrugged, a playful glint in her eyes. "I wanted to catch you before you got too busy. I thought maybe we could have breakfast together." I smiled, nodding. "That sounds perfect. Let me finish up here, and we can head inside." We worked side by side for the next hour, tending to the animals and checking on the crops. There was a comfortable ease between us now, a silent understanding that had grown over the past weeks. Valentina had been spending more time at the farm, helping out whenever she could, and our bond had deepened with each passing day. Once the morning chores were done, we headed back to the cottage. I had made some renovations since moving in, new furniture, a fresh coat of paint, and a few personal touches that made the place feel more like home. The kitchen was warm and inviting, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air as Valentina and I prepared breakfast together. As we sat down to eat, Valentina seemed more relaxed than usual, her smile coming more easily. There was a lightness in her that I hadn't seen before, and it made me curious. "You seem happy today," I remarked as I poured syrup over my pancakes. "Anything special going on?" She looked at me, her eyes twinkling. "Actually, there is something I wanted to talk to you about. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about us building something together, and I realized that I don't want to let fear hold me back anymore." My heart skipped a beat, anticipation building as I listened. "What are you saying, Valentina?" She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I'm saying that I'm ready, Leonardo. I'm ready to take that next step with you, to build a life together. I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of what might happen. I want to be with you, truly and fully." Her words filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in years. I squeezed her hand, my voice thick with emotion. "Valentina, you have no idea how much this means to me. I've wanted this for so long, but I didn't want to push you before you were ready." "I know," she said softly. "And that's why I'm ready now. You've shown me what it means to be patient, to be kind, and to love without conditions. I want to share this life with you, Leonardo." I leaned across the table, kissing her gently. "Then let's do it. Let's start this new beginning together." The decision to move forward together brought a new energy to our lives. We spent the next few days planning out the future, talking about expanding the farm, building a proper home, and what it would look like to truly share a life. There was a sense of excitement, of endless possibilities stretching out before us. A week later, on a crisp autumn evening, I found myself standing in the living room, the fire crackling in the hearth. Valentina was sitting on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I had been thinking about this moment for days, rehearsing what I would say, but now that it was here, my nerves were getting the best of me. I took a deep breath and walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the couch. "Valentina, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She looked at me, her eyes full of curiosity. "What is it?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it to reveal the ring inside. Her eyes widened, her breath catching as she realized what was happening. "Valentina," I began, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I never thought I'd get a second chance at happiness, but then I found you. You've brought light into my life in ways I never imagined, and I can't picture my future without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment she was speechless. Then she nodded, a radiant smile breaking across her face. "Yes, Leonardo, yes, I will marry you." Relief and joy flooded through me as I slipped the ring onto her finger. We embraced, the warmth of the fire and the love between us wrapping around us like a blanket. This was it, the new beginning we had both been searching for. The days that followed were filled with preparations for the wedding. The village was abuzz with excitement, everyone eager to help in any way they could. Valentina and I decided to have a small, intimate ceremony at the farm, surrounded by the people who had become like family to us. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie for what felt like the 100th time. Christian walked in, a broad grin on his face. "You're looking sharp, my friend," he said, clapping me on the back. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," I admitted with a laugh. "But in a good way?" "I can't believe this is actually happening." Christian nodded, his expression softening. "You've come a long way, Leonardo. We're all really happy for you. You and Valentina deserve this." "Thanks, Christian," I said, feeling a swell of gratitude for the man who had become one of my closest friends. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He waved off the comment, but I could see the pride in his eyes. "You had it in you all along. You just needed a little push." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. We stood under a canopy of autumn leaves, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over everything. Valentina looked stunning in a simple white dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. As she walked down the aisle, my heart felt like it might burst with happiness. When she reached me, we took each other's hands, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The vows we exchanged were heartfelt and sincere, a promise to support and love each other through whatever life might throw our way. As we kissed to seal our vows, the village erupted in cheers, and I knew that this was the start of something incredible. Our new beginning was here, and it was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. Later that night, after the celebration had died down and the guests had gone home, Valentina and I sat on the porch of the cottage, wrapped in a blanket as we looked out over the fields. The stars were bright in the clear night sky, and the world felt quiet and peaceful. Valentina leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice soft as she spoke. "I'm so happy, Leonardo. This feels like a dream." "It's real," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "And it's just the beginning." She looked up at me, a smile playing on her lips. "There's something I need to tell you. I wanted to wait until after the wedding, but I can't keep it to myself any longer." My heart skipped a beat, and I could see the excitement in her eyes. "What is it?" Valentina took my hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, Leonardo. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, I was speechless, the news washing over me like a wave. Then, joy exploded inside me, and I pulled her close, laughter bubbling up from deep within me. "Valentina, this is incredible," I said, my voice full of emotion. "We're going to be parents." She laughed, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Yes, we are. A new beginning in every sense." As we sat there together, the reality of our future began to sink in. We were about to embark on a new chapter of our lives, one that was filled with love, hope, and the promise of a family. It was a future I had never imagined for myself, but now that it was here, I couldn't wait to embrace it. The trials and triumphs we had faced had led us to this moment, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. With Valentina by my side, I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had never known before. Our new beginning was here, and it was everything I had ever hoped for, and more.